Since the very first arc of Berserk, the two opposing sides of this story have been clear. On one side, we have the borderline feral Black Swordsman, wielding his hulking Dragon Slayer, flanked by an assortment of unexpected and unlikely allies. On the other, we have his former leader, idol, friend, personal Jesus, current Jesus equivalent of the current world of Berserk, and the collective ruler of humans and apostles alike, Griffith. In the final chapter of the Black Swordsman arc, Puck asked himself what would drive Guts to seek out entities as powerful as the God Hand. When he saw Guts leap at Femto in particular, he wondered what their story was. Then we saw it, and quite frankly, we don't blame Guts for wanting to kill the man he used to worship even a little bit. The battles of the White Falcon and the Black Beast have been important, not just for their characters, but the story as a whole. And yet, 30 plus years following the introduction of the conflict, we're still left with the question, who will win in the end? That's exactly what we're going to try to predict in this video. The basis of Guts and Griffith's relationship, a mutual respect between warriors. To understand the complexities of the question we've posed in the title of this video, it's important we understand the relationship that used to exist between these two. If you're someone that has never read or seen Berserk, but is generally aware of it through hearsay and memes, it might surprise you to learn that Guts and Griffith weren't always sworn enemies. You get lost in the Griffith wasn't wrong memes and the Twitter Cancel Society's concerted effort to get Miura-sensei's masterpiece off the shelves if you even remotely try to get into the series these days, so we don't blame you. But that's what we're here for, so let us tell you a tale of mutual respect between two warriors who came from nothing. From the very beginning, the parallels between Guts and Griffith were being reflected in the way that they perceived the world. And no, we're not talking about them during the Black Swordsman arc. That guy's Femto, not Griffith. The real Griffith, whom we briefly glimpsed in Guardian Angels of Desire Part 6, was a man of great ambition and humbler beginnings. Born and raised by the streets of an unknown city, Griffith was an orphan who found his place in the world alongside other lost souls just like him. They would often play on the cobbled streets of his birthplace, and Griffith would always hoard the souvenirs and trinkets he won in their games. For a time, he must have been content with those small victories, but then he set his eyes upon the castle towering over his birth city, and he knew instantly that was the thing he desired most. Even as a child of barely 10 or 12, Griffith had grand ambitions to become a king, and he began working towards it from the moment he knew that was his ambition. He started out small, organizing a ragtag group of thieves, former jesters, and a particularly oversized miner, but as his Band of the Falcon grew in size, so did his reputation as a fierce and undefeated leader of men, and step by step, this orphan boy with nothing paved his own path towards a dream most would consider impossible. Because his path to kingship involved spilling blood, Griffith made himself adept at shedding blood, with him being his mercenary group's best swordsman, bar none. He knew ways in and around an enemy's armor that they couldn't have imagined in their wildest dreams, and it was all because swordplay was necessary for the survival of his dream. He slept with a perverted two-door official in the early days of his band's creation because he needed the money to fund the survival of his dream. Griffith has always been willing to do whatever it takes to make sure his dream survives, which is as important as breathing to him. Guts, on the other hand, led a similar life, but one can't argue that his formative years were tougher on him than Griffith's. Guts too was born an orphan, and his life had forced war onto him early on as well. But the difference is that while Griffith chose warfare of his own free will, Guts had no say in the matter. He was born from a corpse and raised on the battlefield by a mercenary and his half-crazy mistress. Although she was half-crazy, she was the closest thing to a mother that Guts had ever had. She died of the plague, holding her adopted son's hand when he was only 3 years old. And believe it or not, it got worse from there for our boy. By the time he was 6, Guts was already squiring on the field of battle for his stepdad, Gambino. He was handing out spears at an age children play with sticks, and to make things even more difficult for him, Gambino decided to train Guts in combat. If you ask us why he made such a dangerous decision, it was because he didn't want to lose him before he'd paid his debts. While he did teach Guts many useful things about battle and survival, Gambino had never shown any particular interest in Guts as a human being. To him, the boy was more like an object, a tool to be used for a task and a memento of his deceased lover. If Guts had no fighting potential, it's very likely he'd have been abandoned or sold to slavers. His fate wouldn't have been great, to say the least, considering the series we're talking about here. This makes it that much more of a relief to know that Guts was something of a fighting prodigy. From his very first training session, Guts showed proficiency in combat. He was able to wield a proper training sword, which was likely about as tall as he was at the time, if not taller. After surviving Gambino's initial onslaught, Guts managed to find an opening and strike back. This would have made any trainer motivated by the goal of training a pupil feel proud. But Gambino wasn't training Guts to help him become a great warrior, he was training the boy to survive, and if possible, die an early death for his own convenience. That he struck back was an insult to Gambino, which he repaid with rage, slashing Guts' nose to the bone and giving him the scar that has become synonymous with his character design. Although he gives Guts medicine later on for his wounds and encourages him to continue practicing, it isn't out of fatherly instinct. Gambino does this out of guilt, and in due course, this guilt fades away and is replaced by hatred and rage. Over the course of the next 3 years, Guts becomes a good enough fighter to be deployed in battle. He wins a tidy sum from his first day's work, which he immediately shares with Gambino because he looks up to the man like a boy looks up to a father. In return, Gambino sells his body to another soldier named Donovan, giving Guts trauma that stayed with him well into his teenage years. He had probably hoped that the event would shock Guts into leaving, but when Donovan turned up dead and Gambino made it look like he didn't know what happened that night, Guts chose to remain in the bliss of ignorance. Once Gambino was injured in battle and became an invalid, his true bitterness came spilling out of him, and by the time Guts turned 11, he had had enough. One night, drunk and enraged at the way his own life had turned out, Gambino stumbled into Guts' tent with the intention of killing him. This shocked the young boy's body into fight or flight mode, and he ended up doing both in quick succession. He instinctively defended himself from Gambino's drunken rage and then ran when he realized that he was now a marked man. Despite being shot with crossbows and chased by a pack of wolves overnight, Guts somehow managed to survive, and from that day forward, he decided that he would let no man ever touch him again and gamble his life in battle as a means of verifying his own existence. Guts had been fighting enemies far larger than him throughout his formative years, so it wasn't much of a challenge for him to take out the Grey Knight Bazuso in the chapter titled Golden Age Part 3. He was 15 years old by this point, still carrying a sword bigger than himself, and lashing out at people that tried to get too friendly with him because of the Donovan-sized tumor in his memories. Like Griffith, Guts would do everything humanly possible to retain his freedom and ensure his own survival. He might not have had an external dream to attach this instinct to, but Griffith knew that he shared this trait with him, which is why he ends up recruiting Guts into the Band of the Falcon. Their first meeting isn't a pleasant one, as Guts and Griffith are fighting for opposing powers on their field of battle. Then, Griffith's men try to jump Guts after he kills one of their best men, but when it goes horribly wrong, the Falcon settles the dispute personally. It takes a lot of convincing, but Griffith manages to get Guts to join up with his band after a few days of negotiations, and from that point, they become the strongest military unit the world had ever seen. Guts ends up buying into Griffith's vision not because he wants to be a part of it, he joined him out of respect and a shared understanding of what it takes to survive in a world as cruel as theirs. This is why, when Griffith gets into a position where he needs to make clandestine moves to secure his ascension, he trusts no one but Guts on the matter. The rest of the band members have seen the harshness of life, it's true, but none have experienced it the way that Griffith and Guts have. Though Guts was directionless when they met, the White Falcon sensed his restless spirit and found a kinship in it, and that's why Griffith and Guts' dynamic is different from the rest of the Falcons. The other guys see Griffith as their god, but Guts knows himself and respects Griffith for his skill, not his position. This mutual understanding makes them an unstoppable force when they get into the thick of things, and eventually, Guts and Griffith both became ordained knights, sanctioned and backed by the throne like two commoners in a princess's dream. For a while, we had convinced ourselves that this understanding was probably enough for their dynamic to survive, but Miura had established it pretty early on in the story that Griffith, just like Gambino before him, also viewed Guts as a tool. Though their dynamic as friends was plain to see for anyone with eyes, Griffith himself never saw it as such. He saw Guts first and foremost as his property, and this is where the negotiations they made after their first meeting came into play, because as warriors, their bond was sealed by blood, more specifically, the blood they spilt from each other's bodies. Guts vs. Griffith, round 1 and 2, a pact sealed by defeat. Given that the two men were warriors when they met, it makes sense that their association with one another would start through conflict. When Guts is ambushed by Corcus and his friends, Griffith initially decides not to interfere in the matter. When Guts cuts through two of his men, he sends out Casca to handle him, but then decides to take matters into his own hands, seeing the swordsman's skill. Griffith had seen Guts in action before. Bazuso was a member of the Band of the Falcon after all, and they were the ones defending the castle castle Guts' party was besieging in that Golden Age chapter we mentioned a few moments ago. He had caught Griffith's eye then, but now that he had taken down multiple of his men, including his second in command, Guts had Griffith's undivided attention. As Casca was about to get sliced in half by Guts' mighty greatsword, Griffith intervened and cut off the swordsman's approach by hurling a spear between them. After trying politely to get Guts to stand down, Griffith realizes that violence is his only option, and so he initiates his first face-off with Guts. In this instance, Griffith has the advantage by a huge margin. Not only is he fully armored and horsed, his men control the battleground, Guts is already fatigued from fighting half a dozen of his comrades, and Griffith doesn't need to swing his sword around to take down his enemies. As a genius fighter, Griffith exploits his enemies' weak points, and he manages to take down Guts with a single well-placed stab of his saber, close to the swordsman's heart. It gives Guts a wound that nearly kills him, and gives Griffith the first victory in their win-loss record. But as we just pointed out, there were many things in favor of the White Falcon, chief of which was control of the situation. Their second face-off was a more even contest, and it's also what sealed their deal, so to speak. As we established in the previous section, both Guts and Griffith are men who know what it's like to risk it all to survive and win. Griffith recognized this similarity the instant he saw Guts, and confirmed it with their first fight. He allowed the wounded swordsman to recover from his wounds in his own camp, and when he woke up, Griffith had a proposition for him. The White Falcon recognized the supreme confidence of the wandering swordsman in his own abilities and strengths as a fighter, but he could see the flaws as well. In that fight with Bazuso, Guts only managed to win because he cracked Bazuso's axe with his sword. This went on to turn what would have been a lethal blow to the head into a glancing one, and allowed Guts to cut through the much bigger knight. Griffith picked up on this detail, and realized that Guts fights betting it all on the line because he's trying to find meaning through the fight, kind of like himself. Griffith's only goal is to make his dream a reality, and that kind of all-consuming obsession often makes a man confirm his identity through doing what he's best at doing. At this point in the story, Griffith was the best at both leading a mercenary band and fighting as a warrior, so he proposed that he and Guts have a duel to settle their affairs. Griffith wanted to acquire Guts as a soldier dedicated to bringing his dream to life. Guts wanted to stick it to Griffith for his superior attitude in thinking that they can reconcile so easily after his boys jumped him and for nearly killing him and not respecting him enough to finish the job either. Both men decided that the victor of their contest would have their wish fulfilled. Either Griffith would leave that hill with a hole in his chest, or Guts would leave that hill as the newest member of the Band of the Falcon, and thus began one of the most iconic and decisive fights in the series. In their second duel, Guts was not 100%. He was just recovering from a near-fatal wound, and he was pissed off at Griffith's attitude towards things. But being injured is usually not a problem for Guts. We saw him cut through the Snake Baron and the Slug Count with broken ribs, smashed fingers, and knocked out teeth. We know he can bear pain in a fight. What he wasn't prepared for was Griffith's tactics. The White Falcon was in his prime at this point in the story, and his movement with the sword was like watching a dancer perform a masterful routine. He was able to parry, dodge, and knock aside all of Guts' moves, and he did it all with one hand. This only served to infuriate Guts further, and after Griffith got in a flurry of slashes with Guts having done next to no damage so far, he decided to play dirty. Guts flung dirt into Griffith's eyes with the tip of his sword to try to catch him off balance. If you're not fighting dirty, you're not really fighting, are you? But being the tactical genius he was, Griffith was able to shield his eyes, jump into the air, and in a miraculous display of athleticism, balance himself on the edge of Guts' sword. He thrust the tip of his saber at Guts' neck and asked him to yield, but to everyone's surprise, Guts bit the sword until his mouth bled and used the grip to knock Griffith off balance. He turned it into a slugfest, punching and kicking Griffith, drawing blood and asking him how it felt to have his face punched in for once. He picks up a rock and clasps it in his palm, intending to break Griffith's jaw, but the Falcon strikes first. Griffith intercepts Guts' swing and has him flat on the ground in a position where he can dislocate his shoulder at a moment's notice. Griffith once again asks Guts if he will yield the fight or lose his arm, and obviously Guts chooses the latter. Griffith obliges him and forces Guts to join the Band of the Falcon, telling him that he was Griffith's now. The outcome of this fight wasn't just a showcase for Griffith's skills, it was also a showcase for both warriors' mentalities in life at that point in time. Griffith was fixated on his goal of acquiring his dream, and Guts was dreamless. He was also disturbed by Griffith's assessment of himself right before the fight, while Griffith remained focused on his goal, which was to acquire Guts. Having done that, he assigns him rear guard duty on his first day as a Falcon, and when he outperforms all expectations, Griffith raises him to Raider Captain. Griffith goes out to save Guts' life on his first day as a Falcon because, in his words, he didn't want to lose a soldier as great as him after having acquired him so recently. Griffith tells Guts that he will get a kingdom of his own and that Guts will fight for his cause because he belonged to him now. The White Falcon tells the future Black Swordsman that he will decide the day Guts dies, and those words might turn out to be truer than one might expect. Now, after his loss, Guts honors his word because he's a man of his word, and he becomes Griffith's right hand of doom. Over the next 3 years, he becomes the undefeated Band of the Falcon's unstoppable Raider captain, getting them victory after victory under the most improbable of circumstances. He even carves out a personal legend for himself by defeating 100 Tudor knights in a single night, and being known as the 100-Man Slayer thereafter. And most of all, he assists Griffith with his dirtiest schemes because, number one, no one will get doing the kind of work Griffith asks Guts to do better than him, and number two, Griffith doesn't even trust Casca the way he trusts Guts. The years that Guts spends as a Falcon are the closest thing he ever comes to knowing a family, and the members of the band are likely the first friends he ever made. But this is where the entire conflict between Guts and Griffith begins, because Guts was under the impression that all this time he was Griffith's friend. But in Chapter 12, he finds out that despite surviving near-death situations together time and time again, Griffith never saw him as anything more than a capable soldier. When Griffith defines his idea of a friend to Princess Charlotte, Guts realizes that he wants to stand beside Griffith as an equal, not in terms of becoming a monarch himself, but becoming someone with his own dream to follow. He wanted to become someone that Griffith would call friend, and he thought that finding his own path and his own dream was the way to go about it. Guts decided that he would see through the Band of the Falcon's current campaign commitments to the Kingdom of Midland in the context of the 100-Year War, and then set out on a peregrination of his own. To that effect, he became one of the decisive factors in winning the Battle for Doldrey, a key battle where he took out the famed Tudor General Boscoin in a one-on-one fight. Guts became a knight when Griffith was declared a White Phoenix general by the King of Midland, and after helping him take out all his political rivals, he decided to let his leader know his intentions. What happens next becomes the pivotal fight in Berserk. Guts vs. Griffith, Round 3. The defeat in the snow and the sorrows that came after. Guts had anticipated that Griffith would not let him go without a fight. He was always a realistic kind of guy, and after hearing his leader explain what he explicitly wasn't to him, Guts wanted to just get straight to work. He had faith that even though his leader would struggle with his departure, he would pick himself up, dust himself off, and get right back to it like nothing had changed. He did not anticipate just how fragile Griffith would become because of his absence. One snowy winter morning, Guts announced his departure from the Band of the Falcon, and the roles were now reversed. Whereas their first two fights had Guts with the anxious and angry energy, it was now Griffith who found himself reeling at the loss of an asset like him. When Griffith showed up to confront Guts about his departure, you could see that he wasn't there to convince him to stay or even be his friend. Griffith was pissed. He was pissed because a man he considered a tool, his favorite tool admittedly, was now daring to leave his grasp when he wasn't done with him. Turns out the mutual respect we thought they had for each other as warriors really only went one way. Griffith was a man so obsessed with his desire that he couldn't even recognize his own anxiety at the departure of what was clearly a trusted friend to him. He rationalized it to himself by thinking that if he couldn't have Guts, then no one would, and resolved to actually kill him if that's what it took to make him stay. But this is where Griffith's emotions got the better of him. In their first encounter, the White Falcon had been in the prime of his fighting career, leading from the front lines and, on occasion, covering the rear as well. But once he got into the deep end of Midland's political spectrum, the need for Griffith to personally draw a sword diminished more and more. In the 3 years or so he had spent spearheading the Warband's rise to the status of White Phoenix Knights, Griffith's fighting skills had dulled, while Guts's had increased exponentially. His frantic mental state, combined with his out-of-touch fighting skills, resulted in an event that was thought to be impossible up until this point: Griffith's defeat in a one-on-one duel. And what really drove the nail in the proverbial coffin was that Guts did it with a single sword-shattering swing of his own blade. He left the White Falcon kneeling in the snow and said a quick farewell, thinking Griffith to be a stronger man than himself. Guts sequestered himself in the mountains for a year and trained day in and day out to find his own purpose in life. He must have thought the next time he saw Griffith, the guy would be betrothed to the princess and on his way to becoming king. So imagine his shock when he realizes that Griffith completely broke because of that loss and ended up committing high treason because of it. As an admirer of the White Falcon, Guts failed to consider that even stone idols can get cracks in them, and his idol was already breaking under the pressure of his political schemes. Up to that point, there had already been 2 attempts on Griffith's life during his short residency in Midland's capital city, and he seemed to have unacknowledged dependency issues as well. Whether he liked it or not, Griffith had come to rely on Guts in a way he never relied on anyone but himself, but he also disliked giving up his control over a situation or person. So much so, in fact, that he ended up sleeping with the princess, exposing her dad's lust for her, and he got himself a year's worth of mind-breaking torture because of it. Griffith crumbled because things didn't play out the way he wanted them to for once, and so he decided that he would change the world itself. That way, it would no longer have any power over his ultimate fate. During his year-long incarceration, Griffith got it into his head that Guts was somehow to blame for all his woes. And when 4 angel-like voices one day whispered to him that he was destined to join them as the Blessed Prince of Longing, Griffith's addled mind started latching onto signs only the chosen could see. Over the course of his rescue, he realized that things greater than himself were guiding his fate, and at the moment his mortal mind broke because of his inability to fulfill his dream, his soul accepted the course causality had charted out for him. Griffith triggered the eclipse, sacrificed his old band, sunk into the abyss, and allowed his heart to be filled with the power of evil. Reborn as the 5th and final God Hand member, Femto, he now possessed the ability to alter the course of reality itself and shape it according to his will. According to ancient prophecies recorded in the Holy Sea's scriptures, his eclipse was foretold as a portent of the world's end, and he himself is known as the Falcon of Darkness. Being a God Hand member, Griffith could influence the thoughts of humans in the physical world to fulfill his personal goals, and consequently, those of the idea of evil. And when within the astral world itself, he possesses complete control of the space around him. Griffith can manipulate the concept of space to constrict targets he aims for, tank anything that tries to come for him, and just generally be an invulnerable nuisance. He established his newfound dominance over Guts by violating Casca, the woman he knew Guts loved, and who he himself had envisioned something of a future for himself with right before he went full loco. This act is also what birthed the feral rage that the Black Swordsman harbors towards his former leader, answering the question Puck asked all the way back in Guardian Angels of Desire Part 6. With his rebirth accomplished, Griffith got to bringing the incarnation ceremony to fruition so that he could incarnate into the physical world as an astral being and finally make his dream come true. Once he did that, he launched a war against the invading Kushan Empire and their apostle emperor Ganishka because he knows that one day Ganishka will become the vessel to bring about a world he can truly control. See, when Griffith became a God Hand, he lost his physical body and became an ethereal being. Yes, he has immense power and influence over collective human thoughts, but his direct influence on world events is limited to whenever someone comes across and activates a Behelit. The incarnation ceremony, which you can learn more about on our channel, brings his ethereal God Hand self into a body of flesh. The ritual accomplishes this by channeling hundreds of souls through the vessel that was once the body of the egg-shaped apostle, who was sacrificed in exchange for Griffith's manifestation. Once he is reincarnated into the physical world, all he needs to do is wait for an apostle to get reincarnated twice, and the Skull Knight to attack him with the Sword of Actuation. This is because when those two things come together, they'll allow him to create a global interstice, where he will be able to affect everything as he would have in the astral world as Femto. When that happens in chapter 304, he essentially becomes the absolute supreme being in Berserk. The great roar of the astral world merges the metaphysical planes of Berserk into one living ecosystem, and because the God Hand are practically gods in this ecosystem, Griffith can now shape world events however he feels like. This is what we see him do in the lead up to their 4th encounter. Guts vs. Griffith, Round 4. A soul-crushing defeat that Guts is still spiraling from. The 4th time Guts and Griffith face each other is when Griffith shows up at the Hill of Swords soon after his incarnation. Well, we say that. Guts wants to fight Griffith but ends up having to settle for Zod instead, and in the end, Griffith just flies away without even engaging the Black Swordsman in a fight. The 4th time they actually face each other in a confrontational setting is when Griffith unexpectedly shows up at the island of Elfhelm. Soon after his manifestation into the physical world, the Falcon of Darkness, or rather the false Falcon of Light, began attacking major spiritual anchors of the world. This is because in order to control the world by himself, he needed to eliminate any possible pocket of resistance, and he knew mages like Flora and those at Elfhelm would oppose his tyranny at any cost. So, Griffith made it his priority to take out the spirit trees of the world in order to monopolize the power of his own world spiral tree, aka the corpse of Shiva form Ganishka. His appearance at Elfhelm caught everyone off guard because no one expected the Moonlight Boy's lunar secret to be a body link to Griffith, but it also gave Guts an unexpected opportunity to settle things before they went completely awry. At this point in the story, our fellow struggler had been through a lot and was pushing his limits from a physical perspective as it was. Guts was always a risk taker in a fight, but his years as the Black Swordsman made him fight with a self-destructive sense of reckless abandon, and acquiring the Berserker armor had permanently changed his body for the worse. Yes, when he aligns with its malicious ode, Guts becomes a pure beast of a fighter, with his opponent's best option often being instant death, but the drawback is that the Berserker armor has completely wrecked Guts' senses and nervous system, the point he can barely even fight without the armor anymore. Guts' sight is down to the point where he can barely make out shapes. His hands tremble so much that he has to bandage Dragon Slayer to his arm to even swing it effectively. Guts knows that with every day that passes, he gets closer to death's door. So when he sees Griffith show up, buck nude, in the middle of Elfhelm, he decides that this is his best opportunity to end his tormentor once and for all. Guts charges at Griffith and tries to strike him down dozens of times, but each failed stroke makes his guts sink just a little bit deeper, until he realizes that he can't hurt Griffith at all. When Griffith took on a body of flesh, he essentially became a god on Earth. In chapters 183 and 184, when he is attacked by multiple volleys of Kushan arrows, Griffith seems to simply phase through them, or rather, the arrows bend away from him because of his unique existence and powers. Then, when he confronts Emperor Ganishka in his mobile palace, Griffith summons the literal wind to blow away the Emperor's mist form and force him to his knees. Griffith has control over the souls of the departed, and we can perceive the flow of causality, making him nigh omniscient and omnipotent in the new world. When Guts tries to attack him, all of his strikes miss because of the reasons we've just mentioned. Their fourth fight isn't as much a fight as it is Guts swinging wildly at Griffith whilst coming to grips with the fact that everything he's doing is basically useless. On top of that, after spending years trying to cure and bring back Casca, he had finally done it, and now Griffith stole her from him again. Guts had never been the kind of guy to lose his nerve because of the outcome of a fight, but seeing his helplessness in the face of an incarnated god hand has made him lose all faith in himself. Ever since Elfhelm sank, Guts has been sinking deeper and deeper into the spiral of despair. He has, for the first time in his life, let go of his sword willingly, and is having a hard time reconciling recent events with his own inner demons. Every time he tries to pick up his sword, he's reminded of Griffith defeating him on the day his fate as a falcon was sealed, and at this point, we honestly don't know what Guts is even capable of doing anymore. In chapter 373, we saw his inner beast of darkness taunt him by saying that he couldn't use the bellet he had been carrying around since the first arc of Berserk to gain true power. That would only come if he gave everything up to the beast himself. Guts doesn't seem to have made that decision yet, considering he allowed the Kushan soldiers to not only take him captive, but chain him up and basically carry him off to their capital like a sick dog. Guts' body and mind are both crumbling after spending years keeping him standing on his feet, and we dare say his next recovery might just turn out to be his last. With that comes the prospect of his final encounter with Griffith, which is what we're going to address next. Guts versus Griffith, round 5. How will it end? Who will win? At the beginning of this video, we told you that the basis of their relationship was the mutual respect they had for one another as warriors. Guts and Griffith are more alike than they would care to admit, and that's part of the problem. If they only possessed the maturity to talk about their differences, we wouldn't have to worry about the citizens of the Berserkverse today. But then again, we also wouldn't get Berserk, so we can't complain too much. The point that we're trying to make here is that Guts and Griffith's lives are intrinsically linked to one another's, as long as one of them continues to define it by the other's actions. When Guts was off on his year-long peregrination, it was Griffith who was fixated on his comrade's departure and ended up blaming it all for his problems. When Griffith sacrificed his friends and violated his partner in front of him, Guts vowed to himself that he would not rest until all of demonkind was eradicated from this world. And this is a vow that he often finds difficult to keep because of his other priorities, like protecting Casca and the rest of his friends, but he never rules it out completely, except for the moment right after Griffith's incarnation. When Griffith manifests within the physical world, for a brief period, Guts forgets his rage and hatred towards the man who took everything from him and just basks in his otherworldly presence. To him, this was the ultimate sin, because even if it was for a femtosecond, he forgot about what fueled his feet and kept them moving, and to him that was unacceptable. Guts knows he's bound for hell, literally, and he's determined to send his former best buddy over there first and join him after. But is that really what will ensure his victory over the false falcon? Berserk is a story where a character's powers don't play as much of a role as their intentions, thoughts, and feelings. Yes, power scaling is a thing, but it's only a thing up to a certain point. The reason Guts is unable to affect Griffith is because, subconsciously, he's still a part of Griffith's story, and unless he accepts what has happened and finds a way to move on from it, he will not be able to do anything to the Falcon of Light. How can we say this? Well, it's simple. Rickert mourned his fallen comrades and moved on from his previous life to create a new one with Godot and Erica, which we think is what allowed him to slap Griffith in plain view of all his cronies. In chapter 237, Skull Knight compared Griffith to an author that was writing his story in real time and suggested that only those who existed outside of his story could be the ones to bring him down. By accepting the past for what it was and rejecting Griffith's offer for making the future whatever he wanted it to be, Rickard was likely able to step outside of Griffith's story, which is something Guts will also have to do if he wants to win. The real question is, will he do it? At this point in the story, the Black Swordsman is completely defeated and doesn't believe in the one thing he thought was as good as a body part, and that's his own sword. The last time he was conscious, Guts' inner malice was taunting him to put an end to his good guy act, and, well, the fact that he didn't put up any resistance to being chained is more concerning than it would have been if he did. Unless Casca is brought back to him safe and sound, we don't think Guts is going to opt for the high road option. He has trouble reconciling his own shortcomings, so doing it for a man that made him watch the violation of the woman he loves is a bit of a stretch. That leaves us with the second and far grimmer option of Guts making good on one of the first promises that made us want to distance ourselves from him, and that's killing his own demon child. At this point in the story, we know that Griffith is the Moonlight Boy, and considering the fact that he kidnapped Casca and took her to Falconia, we simply have to assume that the Moonlight Boy is killable, unlike Godhand Griffith. This would make sense considering the Moonlight Boy is a manifestation of the demon child that was absorbed into Griffith's vessel during his incarnation. The reason why we call this option grimmer is because the demon child is also Guts and Casca's baby, one that was corrupted by Femto's demonic seed when he violated Casca. Because he saw his child as a demon spawn, Guts has wanted to kill him for a long time, but he's never quite followed through on it. The likelihood of him doing so decreased further when the demon child helped him reunite with Casca during the incarnation ceremony. As of this moment, Guts remains unaware that his child was absorbed into Griffith's vessel and that he's actually been entertaining and being saved by his own kid every full moon night. Once he does, what happens then? We don't want to say that we endorse protagonists killing children, but Guts has done it before. And this kid he has bad history with, and considering his state of mind, the revelation of their familial relation would likely only drive Guts further into wanting to sever it. Round 5 between Guts and Griffith either ends with Guts finding a way to make peace with his past, thus being able to affect his present and prevent his future from collapsing to chaos and doom, or it ends with him becoming a kinslayer twice over, which we can only imagine would further rend his soul apart. Or, and this is a real possibility considering his current place in the story, Griffith just curb stomps our protagonist and ends up ruling the entire universe with a gilded fist. He's been set up as being pretty much untouchable by the story, but that's exactly what Berserk is first and foremost, a story. And in this story, if the good guy doesn't manage to find a way to win, it would end up undoing years of great writing and anticipation in exchange for a cheap, formulaic way out of things. Marvelous verdict! Guts' victory over Griffith is something the narrative demands, and these are the only two ways we can see it happening. Otherwise, a being with godlike powers being defeated by a magic sword just because he himself is all magic feels like a bit of a cop-out. Kentaro Miura's masterpiece of a story is anything but that, and we have full faith that Studio Gaga and Kujimori will continue to honor it as if Miura-sensei were still alive and well, and they've done so far. But what about you guys? Let us know your thoughts on Guts vs. Griffith in the comments down below. Do you have a favorite fight, or is there something you're looking forward to? Let us know, and don't forget to like this video and share it with your fellow strugglers, and turn that notification bell to all so you can catch up with our Berserk content as soon as it drops. We'll see you guys in the next one, and until then, keep on struggling, strugglers.